Hey, welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. We're going to talk about the revolution, not the American Revolution that happened ages ago, but this new revolution that's happening in the minds of Americans with regards to education. Stay tuned. You're going to love it. You've heard me talk about Mike Lindell, who I adore. You know, he's the inventor of My Pillow, and how that pillow has given me a good night's sleep that I need. In fact, I never knew how good I could sleep before I had my Pillow. Mike continues to roll out new offers on his products, and the latest one is on his towel sets. Towels aren't something you think about often. I never knew what I was missing until I tried the towels just last year. Now, you have all helped build My Pillow into the incredible company that it is today, and you've trusted Mike Lindell to give you a great night's sleep. Mike's now changing the game with his 6-piece towel set. The set's made with USA cotton, making it extremely absorbent, and yet still providing that soft feel you look for in a towel. The set comes with 2 bath, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths, typically retailing for $109.99. But for a limited time, you can get this set for the low price of $39.99. And that's using promo code Sam Sorbo. So remember, all My Pillow products come with a 60-day money-back guarantee. You just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener specials to get this insanely low price of $39.99 on the towel set. You'll find deep discounts on other My Pillow products as well. So enter promo code Sam Sorbo, or you can call 800-625-5983. That's 800-625-5983 for these great radio specials. Hi there. Welcome to the Sam Sorbo Show. I am so pleased that C Bradley Thompson is joining us. I found this gentleman on Substack, of all places, under his I guess the title of his Substack is The Redneck Intellectual. He's also written several books. He's a professor at Clemson. He says the most outrageous things that I found to be absolutely stimulating, frankly. And I can't understand how he's still a professor at Clemson. He wrote a book called America's Revolutionary Mind, A Moral History of the American Revolution and the Declaration that Defined It. And it is a phenomenal book. And I love the perspective that he gives to the founders' minds on the issue of what really was the revolution. In fact, to start us off, I just want to say that when you quote John Adams asking, what was the American Revolution? And he doesn't mean the war. I've been going around for days asking people that and putting it into perspective for them. So welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Thank you very much. It's great to be with you and your audience.
Yeah, it's so great to talk to you. So what did he mean by the American Revolution? We'll cover a little bit of your book, and then I want to get into the state of education in the United States today.
Sure. So when Adams talked about the causes and ultimate meaning of the American Revolution, he did not think it had anything to do with the war. The real revolution, he said, was in the minds of the American people, and that took place in the 15 years before shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, which means he's dating the beginning of the American Revolution to 1760. And the real revolution is an intellectual and a moral revolution for Adams. Over the course of that 15-year period, the Americans came to adopt a new understanding of the nature of man's rights. Formerly, they had believed that the rights that they held were the so-called rights of Englishmen, that is, the rights of a particular people at a particular place at a particular time in history. But in the 1760s, through their reading of the philosopher John Locke, they developed this idea of individual rights or of natural rights, rights that are inherent in human beings qua human beings. And that was a kind of revolution because it said that there are moral principles underlying all government that are true, that are not simply the result of historical development. They're true absolutely, permanently, and universally. And that was a moral revolution. In I think not only in the American mind, but in a sense in all of world history.
And in a sense, it differed from the previous assumptions, which were that as English people, as Englishmen, they got their rights from the king.
In part, they got their rights from the king, and they got rights that developed over the course of many, many centuries. So the so-called rights of Englishmen are centuries old. They were lost in the mists of time. And they grew organically out of the relations of people, the relations between the people and the king, the aristocracy and the king, and they
And they
were
were negotiated, right? I mean, the Magna
exact.
Carta was a negotiation in a sense.
That's exactly right. They were negotiated, and many of these rights and liberties were given to the people, to the English people, as a gift from the king. And the Americans came to reject the idea that government of any sort is the source of rights, that men have rights by virtue of their nature, right? And that is a kind of revolution both in thought and in action.
And that brings me to the topic that I really want to talk to you about, because you've said you're an abolitionist.
Correct.
And abolition in this context is not the same as the abolition of the slavery movement, but in a sense, it kind of is. And I think that you're right. I think that we actually, as a nation, are on the precipice of an abolitionist movement. So when I heard you actually use the term, I was like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. That in a sense, we're looking at what our schools are accomplishing, and we're saying, but that's not what I signed up for. In a lot of different aspects. So not just, of course, the current climate is the CRT and the pornography and the grooming and all of that stuff that's happening in the gender issues that's happening in the classroom. But even prior to that, we're kind of unsettled because all these kids are graduating college, having been promised a career, and they can't hold a job, much less a career. And the governor of Oregon recently signed into law that you don't have to know how to read or do math to graduate high school. And there are a lot of people out there going, wait, that's not, that wasn't the contract that we had.
Right.
So I want I want you to talk about how we advance through this, how we grow the abolitionist movement, what the abolitionist movement actually is today.
Right. So the first thing to say is that it is, of course, absolutely true that America's government schools are failing. They are failing across the board. They are failing to teach the basic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. They are failing to teach our children about America's history. They're failing to teach them proper math and science. They're failing in absolutely every regard. But that is not the primary reason to be an abolitionist. The primary reason to be an abolitionist is because the government schools are, by nature, by their definition, they are immoral. So I want to make this point very clear. I am an abolitionist, not simply or solely because the government schools are failing, which they obviously are, but rather because the government school system is inherently immoral. That is to say, the government schools are founded on force. They're founded on compulsory attendance laws. And if you don't obey those laws, parents and even kids can go to jail. And they're also built on taxation. And when the government schools were first founded in the middle of the 19th century, they were literally explicitly created by the state and for the state. That is to say, the primary function of government schooling is to serve the interests of whomever is in political power, whether it's secular liberals or religious conservatives. The schools serve their interests. and they don't serve primarily the interests of children, and they don't serve the interests of parents. So that's the primary reason that I'm an abolitionist, because I think the government schools are, as I said, are simply immoral. I'm also an abolitionist because I believe in I'm also what I call a separationist. And what is a separationist? A separation is somebody who believes in the principle of separation of church and state, which I do. And if you believe in the principle of separation of church and state, which most Americans do, then it seems to me that you must, by definition, logically, also support separation of school and state, and for the very same reasons. If you don't want the government controlling your churches, or let me put it to you very concretely, if you don't want the government controlling your Sunday schools, why would you want the government controlling your regular schools Monday through Friday? So I start with the separationist position, and by virtue of being and believing in the principle of separation of school and state, I am therefore an abolitionist.
That's interesting, because I've recently developed this theory that every school is a religious school, and therefore the government should not be involved in education.
Well, every school, I would say, is a religious school in the sense that if you regard the state as a religion, which many people do, then it is a kind of religion. It's a
right.
kind
It
of
takes the
faith.
place of other religions. So that's the question. So recently we had the Supreme Court ruling on the Maine situation, where it said that the state could not prevent the funds from being directed to religious schools, basically putting religious schools on a par with the quote unquote non-religious schools. Now, my viewpoint is they're all religious. Just because they don't have God or a thing that they call a deity doesn't mean they don't have one, right? Just because I call God dog doesn't mean I'm not religious when I worship my dog. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah. And what I would also say is that I am not a reformist. I want to make this very clear to you and your audience. I do not believe in reforming the government school system. I don't believe in reforming the government school system, because to reform the government school system is to save the government school system, and to save it is to perpetuate it. And I am not interested in saving or perpetuating the government schools for the reasons I've already laid out, because I regard the institution as fundamentally immoral. So I am on principle an abolitionist. My end goal.
Would you say that schools are successful in terms of what they are set out to do? Are they accomplishing their maybe not their professed goal, but the actual goal of the school? Because you say it's immoral, and in a sense, what you're saying is that it's setting out to do something that shouldn't happen.
In part, that's right. And let me give you a concrete example of what that would mean. So if one of the primary goals of state education, and you can see this going back to the founders of America's government school system in the 19th century, and you absolutely see it today, and that is to disconnect children from their parents. Right? And that
Yay.
is
exactly. So I say that the school, forgive me, I get very excited about this. The schools have been the single most destructive force in the United States for the past 100+ years. And part of the reason for that is they have precipitated the absolute decimation of the American family.
I agree 100%. And that is if you go to America's so-called ed schools, that is the teacher training institutions, they are completely dominated by the ideology of cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism has as its goal the destruction of America's inherited cultural institutions. And the inherited culture institutions are not just the universities, the schools, but they go right down to the heart of the foundation of all civilizations, which is the family, because they are cultural Marxists, which is to say that they want to smash capitalism. And what is the most fundamental way in which you can destroy capitalism? It is to destroy the family. Why the family? Because at the root of the family are two core institutions of capitalism, namely private property and the division of labor. These are two fundamental foundational institutions of capitalism. And so, unlike the old Marxists of 100 years ago, the new Marxists, the cultural Marxists, they have understood that there will never be a working class revolution. Why? Because the so-called working class is actually it's actually a conservative force against socialism and communism. Therefore, the goal is to wheedle their way into America's cultural institutions and ultimately to destroy the family. And you clearly see this, right, in critical gender theory. The whole point of critical gender theory is ultimately to destroy the relationship between children and their parents, right? Which is precisely why America's government schools are now preventing teachers from or administrators from telling parents that their children are now claiming to be transgender. In fact, they are encouraging the transition of children to other genders, and they are explicitly trying to keep this as a secret from parents.
Yes, they actually have forms that the child and the administrator, whoever the facilitator is, who can fill these forms out to set up a plan to have a secret communication to which the parent is not privy. And, what are the pronouns that are preferred by the child? And does the parent know those pronouns? And so you just fill in no. And so they don't tell the parent that the child has a different name, different pronouns at school. This is so divisive within the family. When you put it into the cultural Marxist basket, I wonder if part of that is that when you disassemble the family, well, who's going to inherit, and who cares if they inherit? Like, right? So private property sort of goes out the window because you want it maybe just for yourself, right? It develops a very selfish attitude. But who are you going to pass it on to if your family's completely, imploded? Is that part of it, do you think?
For sure, absolutely, right? And not only is the family the source of the two pillars of capitalism, private property and the division of labor, but it's also the primary source for transmitting inherited culture, inherited manners and mores,
Traditions.
right? Traditions. And so that's what they're trying to destroy. And all of this, Sam, is coming from the so-called ed schools. The ed schools are the most radical part of every single university. And they are completely dominated by progressive education and cultural Marxism.
Okay, we're going to take just a very brief break, and then I will be back with C. Bradley Thompson. I want to talk to you about an article that you wrote on your Substack, and I recommend your Substack to everybody I talk to. This piece is called "Our Killing Schools." So I want to talk about that, and then we're going to talk about the path forward, because there is light at the end of this tunnel. There is good news around the corner. Stay tuned. This is the Sam Sorbo Show. I'll be right back. We've discovered, my husband and I, a great American company that supports our traditional values and also the work we're doing to rescue our culture from the lies of the left. So I want you to go check it out. It's called NutraMedics.com, NutraMedics.com. And you can find there great health and wellness products that are derived from the rainforests. I've found that they work incredibly for me. I take their melatonin. I get a much better night's sleep with that. I also take their relax medics and their mood medics, which are, I don't know what they are, but they're this natural blend of herbs basically, and really easy to take. They actually droppers, and I just love their products, and I love what they stand for because they have a heart for this nation and they have a heart for people. And I don't know how you would have one without the other. And that's why maybe they have both. But I just love what they do. So go to nutramedics.com and you can actually go to sorbo.nutramedics, and that's with an X, sorbo.nutramedics.com. If you use Sorbo at checkout, you'll get a discount on anything that you purchase there. So go check it out, get a better night's sleep, get a better day, feel better about yourself. They've got a lot of great products there, including vitamins. I use them all. So trust me, it's great. Nutramedics.com. And thank you so much for listening. Hi there, Sam Sorbo here. So for the second part of my interview with C Bradley Thompson, we're going to talk about our killing schools. What is causing all the massacres in our schools? He has some very strong thoughts upon this, and wait till you hear it. It might just intrigue you. All right, welcome back to the Sam Sorbo Show. I'm sitting here with C Bradley Thompson. I'm so excited to talk to this individual. You have to check out his Substack, The Redneck Intellectual. When I saw the title, I'm like, oh, what's that? And I had to check it out. But he's also written this book, America's Revolutionary Mind, which is available at Amazon or anywhere fine books are sold. And it talks about this revolution that happened in the minds of Americans right before the American Revolution. In other words, the American Revolutionary War would not have been fought if these individuals hadn't had this shift of mindset. And I believe that we are sitting on the precipice of another very big shift of mindset in this nation. And that's what gets me excited. So I talked about in the previous segment that we were going to talk about this piece that you wrote, Our Killing Schools. I have some very strong thoughts about why we see mass murders taking place at the most vulnerable places in our society by young people who have just basically are just emerging from having been drowned in those institutions, right? So talk to us about that.
So this is a very controversial series of articles that I wrote. And what I was trying to do in the essays was to give a kind of philosophic explanation for America's school shootings. So over the course of the last 23 years, there have been now a series of mass school shootings. And the question that nobody is asking is, why are America's 15-year-old boys committing mass murder at school, right? Everybody on the left wants to talk about guns, and on the right, they want to talk about video games, but they're not asking the most important question, which is, why are these boys, and they're usually around the average age is 14, 15, 16, why are they walking into their school and wanting to commit mass murder? And what I'm trying to suggest is that the boys, they have reasons for targeting the school, right? They are destroying, they are trying to destroy that which has given them the most suffering in their lives. And so the question then becomes, well, what's going inside the four walls of America's schools? And I think it comes down to a couple of really important factors. The first is progressive education, right? And progressive education has been in America's schools for over 100 years. And it manifests itself in a series of different ways. But let's just take one example. The way in which children are taught to read or not read, as the case may be. And there are two ways to teach children how to read. There's the only real way, the only true way, which is traditional phonics. The English language is an alphabetic language, which means it's based on the 44 phonemes of the English language. And as all children have to do is learn the 44 phonemes or sounds associated with each letter of the alphabet. And a child can learn to read in just a few months. The second method, which is the one that is pushed by America's education schools and is now taught in most government schools, is the so-called whole language or whole word approach. And rather than learning the building blocks of the English language, namely the phonemes of the language, what this method does is it has children memorize whole words. So starting in kindergarten and grade 1, children are sent home every night with cue cards with whole words on them. And what they have to do is just look at the card, look at the word, memorize the word. If they can't memorize it, they should outline it with a pencil, right? So in other words, what we are doing is we're converting the English language into hieroglyphics, right? So children look at symbols. Now think about it. Think about what this leads to. Think about an 8, 9, or 10-year-old boy in grades 4, 5, or 6. And they haven't, because the human mind is not capable of memorizing more than about 10 or 15,000 words, despite the fact that there are over 1 million words in the English language. What happens is these kids, they are overwhelmed once they get into 4th, 5th, and 6th grades, right? They're not simply learning how to read. They're using their reading skills in all of their subjects: math, science, history, literature, and they're now being exposed to tens of thousands of words which they can't memorize. And so consider what happens to, let's say, a 9-year-old boy who's asked to stand up in class and read in front of his classmates. And the fact of the matter is he can't read. And these reading classrooms have these huge books on easels. I mean, and by huge, I mean larger than my arm span. And on the facing page of every page with words are pictures. And if a child can't read a word, he's supposed to guess at the word relative to the picture. And if he doesn't know the word relative to the picture, then he should guess at the word based on its shape, right? This is pure insanity. And so what we have is a generation of children, particularly little boys, who can't read. And what happens to a little boy who can't read? First, he's humiliated. Humiliation turns into anger. Anger turns into resentment. And then resentment turns into them acting out. And what is America doing with its little boys who are acting out in class? They're diagnosing them with ADD, ADHD. And then what are they doing with boys with ADD? They're putting them on Ritalin. So we have a generation of young boys, and almost all of the young boys, these teenage boys who've been involved in these shootings have been on Ritalin, right? And so you take these boys who can't read, and then you thrust them into the Hobbesian world of America's high school that is nasty, poor, brutish, and short. And they simply can't function. And so therefore, the school becomes the source of their resentment. Then the second major cause is that the schools, from the time they enter kindergarten, are teaching moral relativism and nihilism. The schools are telling children that there are no standards of right and wrong. It's
That's
only
religious
what you think.
instruction.
It's a new kind of religious instruction.
But it is religious instruction. It's moral instruction, right? And so therefore it's religious in nature.
In a sense, it is, because the children are required to take their emotions on faith as a legitimate view of reality. And so what's happening is that each kid with his own passions, his own emotions, those emotions then are encouraged by the teachers as being real, right? So there are in classrooms around the United States, there are mirrors, right? And children look at the mirror, and above the mirror is a sign which says, "You are now looking at the most important person in the whole world," right? So and they're, in other words, they are legitimizing,
yeah,
sometimes really bad and corrupt ideas.
Narcissistic ideas, maybe?
And then it transforms itself into a kind of narcissism, right? And then when that narcissism confronts the ugliness of America's high schools, it's not surprising, right? That
plus, mind you, they're also being taught that they are accidents of nature, that there's really no purpose to life.
Oh,
because
for sure. And that's That's part of the nihilist project, right? Which
Yeah.
is to say that there is no meaning, there is no purpose in life, and life is just emoting your passions.
And boy, are they emoting with
And
guns.
precisely, right? And so the insane thing now, what's really made and what brings everything full circle, like I want to make this very clear. I'm a very strong Second Amendment person, very strong. However, there is something genuinely perverse about having guns in schools, right? Because guns mean force, and force is the antithesis of freedom and of the freedom that is required for the human mind, right? So I understand why, for instance, teachers want to be able to protect themselves, and I want that too. Still, the optics of having guns in schools, and we're turning our schools virtually into prisons.
Well,
Schools
they
now
are.
they
They
have
are, because they have the metal detector on the way in. They've got the barbed wire. They've got I mean, they're painted to look like prisons. Like, they're prison pipelines is really what they are, especially in the inner cities.
That's exactly right. And the doors lock behind you when you walk into class, right? I mean, it very much has the feel of a prison. So we have manufactured um, a prison-like system for America's government schools. But then on the other hand, they are government schools, and government schools are based by definition on force. So we shouldn't, in the end, be that surprised.
Okay, that's huge. That's a big idea, is that because it's based on force, of course we're going to see force used inside the school. That is the offset. That's the default. That's actually quite a correlation to draw there. That's good.
I mean, it's the logical fulfillment of what the government schools are about.
Right. In fact, so, we talked briefly that the schools are actually doing what they were set out to do. And the idea that, and this is why you're not a reformer, right? You're not for reforming the schools. What I like to say is, if you want to reform the schools, like you want to fight for the school board and change out the teachers, you're going to get the system that brought you here. But you don't like where you are, but you're going to turn back the clock a little bit and hope that somehow you don't end up here again. And I think that that's ridiculous. But adding into the context of all of that, this idea that because the system itself is a coercive system, it will end up with force. That's sort of a natural. That's interesting. I've been talking to people about the Second Amendment. I'm very pro Second Amendment also, and I know that we're fighting. We're fighting in the halls of Congress or whatever. We're fighting in the, debates on TV and stuff. We've already lost, because if you're a first grader or a kindergartner and you bite your Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun, you're suspended. Or if you bring in a little toy gun, or if you make your fingers into the shape of a gun, you're suspended. And that's not actually the child that's being punished, although children will receive that as a punishment. That's the parents that are being punished. So the parents are now in the business of teaching their children, don't you ever touch a gun. Don't you ever pick up a gun. Guns are bad. From a very young age. You want gun control? That's the way to accomplish it.
That's one way to accomplish it. To accomplish it, yes. But
you just have to be patient.
But Sam, before we finish, I think we absolutely need to talk about the bright side of things, right?
Yes, please.
The future, right? So
you have a minute.
Yeah, I'll go very fast. We're living at a very important time in history. I've never been so optimistic in my life about any political issue as I am right now about education. At my other website called edwatchdaily.com, our motto is #JustWalkAway. We're trying to lead a revolution of ordinary, everyday Americans to just walk away from the government schools. And the fact of the matter is, it's happening. In the last 3 years, over 1 million families have taken their kids out of the government schools and are now homeschooling them or have put them in private schools or charter schools. This is the beginning, I think, of a revolution. But at the heart of the revolution is homeschooling. And the leaders of the revolution are America's homeschooling mothers, who are really leading the way in really radically changing America for the better. And so I tip my hat. And I tip my hat to all of the mothers who have been going to these school board meetings for the last 2 years and raising hell against critical race theory and critical gender theory. So there is reason to be optimistic and hopeful, and eventually we are going to lead a movement that is going to abolish the government schools and take us to a true free market system of education.
Yeah, I heartily agree, and I'm so glad that you are helping in this fight. I've been working to get people out of the schools for quite a while, and now it's come down to this. I'll just because I want to talk to you more. I want to further this conversation. The way that what school accomplishes is the opposite of education. School teaches don't ask, don't try, don't think. That's what our quote unquote education system teaches, and it's the opposite of education. And the more people that leave the system and start to discover what actual education is, and they take a step back from all the design curricula and all of the shackles that the school puts on learning, and they free their minds, they free their children's minds, and they embrace creativity and open up, the bigger, the faster, the better the revolution. And I do think that we're sitting on a precipice. I want to thank you so much for joining me. All the links are in the bios here and online, so you can go find all of that. C Bradley Thompson, thank you so much for joining me.
Sam, thank you so much.